We're going to be talking today, Joanna and I, about how we can tell our sustainable travel stories more effectively, why we need to tell them in the first place, and then how do we go about doing that. Quick introductions. I run a travel blog called The Shooting Star, and my focus areas are slow travel, trying to reduce my carbon footprint by doing no fly journeys. I focus a lot on living culture, something that Kavya talked about earlier. And I also follow a vegan lifestyle, both from an ethical and an environmental perspective, and that's something that I also advocate for. I'm on Instagram as Shivya, and I also run a consultancy called Climate Conscious Travel, where we work with businesses and destinations to help accelerate climate action in tourism. So that includes measuring scope 1, scope 2 emissions, sustainability reporting, sustainability storytelling, and so forth. I'll pass it on to Joanna to introduce.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna. I have a background in journalism. I was a commercial-facing travel writer for many, many years and have since moved to the B2B space, and I work as a consultant. I work as a journalist still on industry-related issues at the intersection of sustainability, social impact, and storytelling. I'm the founder of a company called Rooted, and these are a couple of the areas that I feel passionate about. I am a big believer that a lot of the solutions to our global challenges are already sitting among our local communities and people who have been doing this work for a long, long time. And there's a lot of power in moving away from the fear of the story to the hope, to the people who are doing this work. So today, we are going to be talking about how we can tell that sustainability story in a way that is more impactful, in a way that empowers people. And we also want to give you some insight into how you can work with the travel media in a more meaningful way. Do you have our... Okay, there we go. So, why should we care? Why does it matter how we tell our stories? Why does it matter that we have thoughtfulness behind how we're working with media and content creators? We're all here because we believe tourism is a force for good. And I hear that when I have these conversations with people here. But when it comes to sharing that story beyond these tables, beyond these meetings, that story is not always being told in a way that is relatable, that is personable, that is creating any sort of meaning, and that story is not often being shared with the people who are our travelers. And as a travel writer many, many years ago, I could see this huge gap between what destinations, tour operators, service providers were doing, the good work they were doing, the intentions they had, and then the actual travel articles that were being written, the content that was being shared. So here's the thing. Content, when I refer to content creators in this way, I'm referring to people who are bloggers, who have YouTube channels. I'm referring to travel media, travel journalists who are writing for traditional publications, print and online. I'm also referring to influencers. And the thing is that they are as much a part of our industry, the tourism industry, as every single one of us. We think of the tourism industry as the destinations, the accommodations, the service providers, the people who are delivering the products and services. And I argue that the content creators, the travel media are as much a part of this industry and as important, if not more so, than all those other people and service product providers. Here is why. 86% of travel decisions are influenced by social media, but it's not just social media. People are still reading magazines. People are consuming content by bloggers. Your websites are important. And the content that is being created and shared by YouTubers, by influencers, by travel media matters a great, great deal. So how do we get your sustainability story to those content creators in a way that makes sense, that is approachable, that is appropriate, that is transparent, so that they can then tell that story to their followers, to the readers of publications. We need to do a much better job of including this segment of our industry in all of our conversations. Because they've been left out of the conversations. Because we often see media at events like this as people who are coming to report on the event, but they're not just here to learn about what's happening. They're being hosted on press trips without being included in conversations about what the future of our industry looks like. And so the media content creators are so important. They're our partners, and we need to do a better job of learning how to share that story through them.
So before we move forward, I think it'll be nice to see with a show of hands how many people here are part of the travel media. So you're journalists or you write for publications. Okay, 2 hands, 3 hands. Okay. What about creators, bloggers, Instagrammers, YouTubers? 5, 6. Okay. Yeah. And what about industry members who also take care of their own marketing? Okay, great. So I think we have a bit of everyone here, and that would allow us to tailor the conversation a little bit more. But before we go there, I want to hear from you. Why do you think it's important to tell stories about sustainable travel or sustainable practices that you're following in your businesses? Both from a media and a creator perspective, but also from an industry perspective. Why do you think these stories are important? Can anyone throw out a word or two?
Tourism has both impact, negative and positive impact. Just to let them know that what footprints we are doing while traveling and how we should offset or leave no trace of our negative impact.
As well. So again, if it's your brand ethos as well, like you would like to talk about where it started, it's your passion that you want to
So the travelers changing themselves. So just to be effectively communicating to them, I think.
Yeah, so taking up on that, since the time we started, telling the story of hotels and destinations from the lens of sustainability, everything before about sustainability, it had a little bad press. Sustainability meant, words like rustic would be used, and things like why is sustainable? If it is sustainable, why are you so expensive? The kind of words that were being used for sustainable travel, and somehow it seems sustainable travel and luxury are two different things, while it is not. So a lot of misconceptions about sustainable travel, because sustainable travel, probably in the West it was different, but in the Asian context, you must understand that our lives even in the 80s was kind of quite sustainable, in the sense our day-to-day lives. We never heard of plastic. I never heard of plastic, polythene bags till I think I came to Delhi. Everything was wrapped in banana. These teacups that you see, so all of that, those mud teacups were a part of our lives. There is no throwaway teacup. So this disposable didn't exist in our vocabulary. So when it went into, so even now if you see in villages, and I see when they do like a wedding or something like that, it is a prestige that you're doing disposable stuff. Somebody told me, I went to a wedding and I said, why is there so much this thing? Because earlier they used to use leaf, the Bohemia leaves, plates. And I said, they said, oh, if we don't use them, they'll think we are like, we're not poor, we're kind of cheaping out on the experience of the wedding meal experience. So to get that word out, because the clarity about what sustainable travel really is, which is what the first panel was saying, that is a very good way. And also to say sustainable travel is not cheap. Neither is it to go, you don't need to slum it out, So those are the kind of things I'm learning every day.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm hearing you say is there is a perception about what travelers expect. And my question is, why do they have that expectation? It's often because of the way we've told the stories in the past, of how we've framed that, how we've talked about whether we've used the word sustainability or not. We've created expectations, and a lot of that has to do with the communication and how we've presented those those things. You had something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to add is an exchange of experiences. This means that when we are in our own bubble as an industry, like each one can be an isolated process, right? And sometimes we having an exchange of experience so is also important for us to grow, to learn from other experience. So I think it's important to compare and grow together in a sense. This is a journey, we know that, but we know where we are and we think that we haven't done enough or we are afraid to start, as if from a trade perspective. So by sharing the experience can help each other to grow together and see there are common path, common mistake, common challenges, and then learn from each other.
Yeah, we've heard a few people say that. Yeah.
Yes, more than anything else, I think it's the need of the day. For the travel needs to change, and for the survival of the planet, because it's important when the travel is happening, the resources are being eaten. So for the any business to give back or accommodations or travel agents who are doing business, it's important that they give back to the destination. So creating that awareness, I think, is very mandatory for a safe future tomorrow.
Yeah. So you're talking about education awareness.
Yes.
Something that's
Yeah, so thanks everyone for sharing and Ritu for bringing that point, because I think it's so important to tell these stories, of course, to share our ethos and to share what happened in the past and what has changed now, but also the fact that tourism is causing all these problems. So there's over tourism, there's climate impacts, and tourism is also vulnerable to them. Like the more pollution there is and the more erratic weather there is, it directly impacts tourism as well. So we always have to protect our own butts in that sense. So I think the question that we want to pose to you today is, our storytelling as media, as
Creators, and as industry members, is that ruining the very thing we love, which is traveling the world and traveling for natural experiences, for pristine places, for living cultures? Is our stories, are they actually ruining these experiences for everyone else? And how can we be more mindful of the way we tell these stories? So let's talk about how we can actually tell our stories in a way that's more mindful and respectful for everyone. So the first thing is, I think, just to deepen our own understanding of what sustainability means, because a lot of times we just think, not having plastic bottles. I think that's a great first step, but it's only the very, very beginning. How do we then deepen our understanding of what it means to be more sustainable? We were having a conversation, Joanna and I, about, how do you, as an accommodation or as a tour provider, how do you benefit local communities? And the usual answer to that is we employ them. But I think that's the very, very basic thing we can do, right? But what other changes can we bring about in the larger community by our presence there? So I think we almost need to think of tourism as a means to an end, and ensure that our storytelling can also ensure that tourism becomes a means to an end. It's not just something that I do for my own entertainment or fulfillment, but also because it has a positive impact on the place I go to and the people who live there. I think it's really important to think outside of the box. So, oftentimes, when we think about telling our sustainability stories, we think about the numbers, which are important. We think about terms that we need to use, carbon neutral and offset and zero waste and whatnot. And all of that is important. But I think we can also be a little bit more creative in the way we tell our stories. So, I want to share an example of a project that I worked on when I went to Spiti, which is a cold mountain desert in India. And we know that plastic is the story of every mountain destination in India. There's Maggie tourism, and there's kurkure packets even in the remotest of villages today. And of course we can tell that story by saying, hey, don't litter, but nobody's listening to that. Or don't consume plastic, and nobody's listening to that. So what we decided to do is bring together the community of Kaza, and we worked to collect trash from all across the streets of Kaza. So we collected plastic bags, we collected kurkure packets, Maggie, and we collected about 500 plastic bottles. So these were bottled water that tourists were drinking. These were Coke and Pepsi bottles that locals were drinking. And we brought them all together to build an art installation, which became a selfie point in Spiti. Can you still hear me? I think I can be loud enough, right? And people would start coming here and taking photos of I Love Spiti, but also then making the connection with the plastic that they are coming to this remote mountain desert and consuming, and what that means for a region like Spiti where there is no waste management, not until 500 kilometers away. And also realizing the fact that here is pure glacial water that you can drink, so you don't have to go to the shop and buy that plastic bottle that you really don't need in this place. And then this story got picked up by Condé Nast Traveler, Travel and Leisure, The Better India. Many bloggers wrote about it, many Instagrammers posted about it, and so this became the story of plastic in Spiti that we were just a little bit more creative in telling. The other thing is, there is still this perception, like Shobha said, that sustainable travel has this misconception that it's a burden or a responsibility or an obligation. And let's face it, most people when they travel, they just want to have a good time. But you can have a good time and be sustainable. And so I think we need to change our approach to storytelling to make sure that our stories are making sustainable travel the aspirational choice. You want to do it not because it's the need of the hour, but because it is a better way to travel. It's a way that you can immerse in a destination, it's a way that you can connect with local people on a much deeper level, and therefore you want to travel sustainably. So these are just a couple of examples on stories that I did recently on low carbon travel. So my goal was to fly as less as possible, but also to do it in a way that was really adventurous. So I did a land journey from Switzerland, taking multiple trains, I think over 75 hours of time spent on trains, traveling from Switzerland to the Norwegian Arctic. And then I wrote about why there were many issues that cropped up. There's passport privilege, there's the fact that it takes more time, money and effort to do this rather than just hop on a plane and go all the way. But why is it a greater adventure than just hopping on a plane? So I think making that connection with sustainability being more adventurous and aspirational is really important in our storytelling. I also did a story on what cycling across Morocco taught me. So I did an e-biking trip with Intrepid Travel a couple of months ago across Morocco. And because we were slowly wheeling through the landscapes, we could really feel the impact or the environmental impact of things that are happening in Morocco. So Morocco has been going through a drought for the last 6 years. And if I wrote a story about, Morocco is going through a drought and therefore we need to change the way, tourism is impacting Morocco, nobody would read that. But when I write a story about what cycling across Morocco taught me, and as part of that story, I talk about, we cycle past these incredible mountains and the riverbed, but the riverbed was entirely dry. And that's because Morocco is going through a drought. That catches people's attention. And so I think we need to do it in a way that is more accessible to people, but it also makes sustainability the more fun option, the more fun way to travel. I think today Kavya did a great job of talking about why we need to bring out local voices and local perspectives from our travels and also from our regular consumption choices. So I wanted to talk about a couple of projects here. So one of them is Voices of Rural India. So this is a project that we started during the pandemic. And the idea was that a lot of us who are associated with travel, we have the privilege and the means to pivot into other directions just to make sure that we still have a source of income during the pandemic. But a lot of rural communities who were associated with tourism, especially in the Himalayas or even in the central and eastern parts of India, they might not have that privilege and that access. So we started working with some of these communities through social enterprises or community-based tourism initiatives to sort of handhold them through a storytelling process that would allow them to tell their stories digitally. So most of them are master storytellers, but their traditions have always been oral storytelling, which is passed down from one generation to another. And we kind of brought in, a little bit more digital awareness to it. So how do you do that through photography? How do you do that through videos and writing? And so we had some really incredible stories. For example, there was an Amchi in Spiti who talked about healing practices that have been used across Spiti for generations, like how they eat stones by crushing them in order to heal certain ailments. And they write about their own beliefs in their own ways. And the only thing we do is kind of, we put them on the website in the local or the regional language, and then we also translate it into English for an urban audience. We had a teacher in Kerala who wrote about, she's about 60 years old, but every day she walks about 4 or 5 kilometers to carry books to, rural families of farmers who don't have time to go to the library and borrow books because she wants everyone to have a reading, tradition. And then they discuss books and what they found interesting about those. So she wrote about her story and what motivates her to do that every single day. And so we had some beautiful stories on the platform, but the important thing was it's their voices. And a lot of times we go in as outsiders and we kind of we bring our own perspective to their stories, but it's also important that their stories are told. There's something that I also experimented with, which I like to call community collaborative storytelling. So I wrote a story about a social enterprise called Himalayan Arc, which is a community-based tourism initiative in Munsiari. And I wrote it for this website, The Better Traveler, which is a Singapore-based website. And how they tell their stories is that they have, like a big story, and then they have two smaller stories accompanying that, so that people can also, have bite-sized versions of the story. And so we had this deal that instead of me writing all three stories, I would write the first one, but the other two would be written by community members in their own voices. So we had two people from Munsiari. One is a birding guide, and one is she's a homestay owner. So both of them wrote their perspectives of what it means to have tourism in their village, what are the challenges and what are the joys. And all the photography for this story was done by community members as well, because everyone has access to smartphones these days. And the best part was we all got paid the same fee for writing these stories or for telling these stories. And so I think we need to consciously create space for, uh, you know, like the people around us, especially for the local and indigenous communities in the areas that we work in or the areas that we visit, because their voices are really important, and we can't really, we can bring in our perspective, but we can't speak for them, right? They have their own voices, and those voices need to be heard as well. And this is the last point from me, which is that a lot of times when we work with media and creators, we tend to do these cookie cutter itineraries. You come and stay with us for 2 days, 3 days. We tell you what our sustainability practices are, and hopefully you don't ask any questions. You just report them as is. But I think we need to change that now. The world is getting smarter, and we need to have more creative ways to tell our stories, but also give creative people the freedom to tell them in a way that is true to them and to their audience. And so I think slow travel can really help us build connections. So instead of inviting someone to stay with us for 2 or 3 days, maybe you can do 2 or 3 weeks, and then allow them to actually become part of the fabric of the place. Really connect with the place, feel a sense of responsibility towards the people that they are meeting and towards the kind of work that you're doing, and really turn them into ambassadors. And I think as media and as creators, we can also start having that conversation about slower travel when we go to places like this. So the yeah, if you have a pressing question, please.
Rush, like, are there any terms and conditions in the sense, like, I'm not talking about a professional fee or barters, like, in the sense of, do they tell you expectations like this is how we would like the stories to come? When it comes, if at all there is some, how do you handle that?
I'm going to talk about that a little bit.
Oh.
Yep. Hold that thought. Come back.
So I just want to share the last example. I think this is one of the favorite projects that I worked on.
So I was invited to spend a month on this island called Robinson Crusoe, which is located about 700 kilometers off the coast of Chile in South America. And because of the fact that I was asked to spend a month there, which I probably would never have been able to do on my own, it allowed me to build such great connections, not just with the local community that lives there, but also with everything that's happening with the local ecosystem. So this island wasn't inhabited until 500 years ago, which means that all the species on this island have evolved in isolation. So it's slow growing, slow reproducing endemic forests. And most of the species that are found here are only found on this island. And so I remember we hiked to a tree. Um, we went through like these mountain terrains, through the ocean, through old forests, through desert like terrain. And then finally, we reached this tree that stood pretty much in the middle of nowhere in a ravine. It's called the Dendroceres nerifolia. That's the biological name. And it's only found on this island. So It's not found anywhere else on the earth. And that was the only remaining member of that species that is still alive today. And so I think in Chile, in South America. So we read about, how we are going through a mass extinction and there's species extinctions happening and there's biodiversity loss. But I think to actually go to a place and to see it before your eyes, it can completely change you. And I think the fact that we were allowed to process this in a slow way by spending a month on this island, I think it gave me such a profound sense of responsibility to tell these stories that I ended up doing. I had a set of deliverables that I had to do, but I ended up, delivering 3 times of that. And then I also ended up writing about, this story for Lonely Planet, for adventure.com, because I felt like, what are the odds that someone like me can go to, this remote part of the world, spend a month there and be able to tell these stories. And so I think just making sure that storytellers feel that profound sense of responsibility to tell your stories in a way that is compelling and that's honest. I think slow travel is a really powerful way to make that happen. And with that thought, I'm going to pass it back to Joanna.
So one of the things that I've been noticing in my time here having conversations is we keep talking about the local communities and we're hiring the local people, and we are all waking up to the fact that it's so important that tourism is benefiting the communities that we're in. But I think one of the things that we're starting to bump into is what I'm calling or have called local washing. And whereas in the past, we've talked about the extraction of natural resources for travelers, using water, using creating waste, things like this. We need to be very mindful as we begin to embark on a new chapter of our storytelling and sharing our stories with the world, that storytelling does not become a new form of extraction. Stories are gifts. What people share with us, their cultures, their history, is not just for consumption. And as service providers, as members of the media, we need to be thinking very carefully about the power dynamics that we bring into a community, what local people, local residents, indigenous communities might feel that they have to give in order to benefit in some way by tourism. And the last thing we want to be doing is commodifying cultures in order to sell our destinations. So we need to be really mindful of respect. Sometimes the stories are shared with us that are not ours to share. Sometimes you might find a compelling image that you want to take a photo of that's not appropriate to take a photo of, not appropriate to share. We might know what happens when something goes on social media, but not everybody does. And so as we embark on this new chapter of storytelling, I would just encourage you to be really mindful of how we're using those stories and avoid local washing. Again, my term, because there's not really a term for this, but I think it is something we need to be thinking of. So here is a washing that you're probably familiar with. Greenwashing, of course. Some folks were talking about this morning. Sustainability and climate issues are things that are more mainstream conversations now. People know these are issues, and so companies some of them are taking action, but a lot more are talking and not walking the walk. And what's happening then is that we're seeing greenwashing. In other words, people are claiming to be sustainable, they're claiming to be eco-friendly, but when it comes right down to it and you say, what does that mean? How many carbon emissions are you cutting every year? What are you doing? What does sustainability look like? They're not able to tell you that. And this actually is going to start coming back and biting a lot of companies in the butt, because legislation is coming down the pipeline in the UK, throughout the European Union. Australia just passed a law, and a variety of airlines and travel companies, Booking.com is one, are suddenly having to walk back on a lot of sustainability claims they've made because they've only been claims. There's no action behind them. So we need to be really mindful that we are actually putting the work in. The action comes first, the storytelling comes next. but you can't tell the story if you're not taking the action. On the flip side of this, and somebody mentioned this morning, is green hushing, which means that you are taking action, that you are doing really good work, but you're not sharing that. And there are a lot of reasons for this. You might not have the marketing budget. This is true for a lot of small companies. You get so caught up doing the work that you are not putting in the time to share that story. You might not know how to tell that story. And there are a lot of reasons why it happens. The other reason it happens is because people are afraid that they're going to be canceled, that they're going to be called out. I think you mentioned this in your presentation this morning. But being transparent, putting into words the actions that we're taking when it comes to sustainability is very important because it holds us accountable. Even if we're on the journey, but we haven't reached perfection, there is no perfection, so let's just scrap that idea. But this is an awesome opportunity for us to learn from each other. And that can't happen unless we're talking about what we've done, what we've learned on our journey, and how others can learn from us. Let's not all reinvent the wheel. When we lift each other, we all lift higher, faster. So we do need to be talking about this, but we also need to be very mindful that we are not greenwashing. So let's talk a little bit about the nitty-gritties of how we tell these stories now. A lot of people have asked me, what words and phrases should I just straight up not be using? What words shouldn't be used when it comes to travel? And I am actually a believer that there are very few words that we should like straight up not use at all. What I do believe is that we need context, and we need to acknowledge our presence and perspective when it comes to sharing stories. We also need to be thinking about all these words that are tied up with sustainability. Sustainability itself, eco-friendly, net zero, carbon neutral, all of these words that we're told we should be aspiring to, all these things we should be aspiring to, but we have some problems when we use these words. The first one is that there is no shared definition. We don't have any clearly defined parameters around like what does sustainability mean. And even if we agree to that in this room or at this conference, what that means to travelers, what that means in different cultural contexts is all over the board. And so one of the best things that I think we can do is tell our sustainability story without ever using the word sustainability. So my question to you would be, if you're telling me you're sustainable, I would say, how? Why? What does that look like? Tell me that story without telling me you're sustainable. And the same thing is true when it comes to any of these other buzzwords. What do you mean when you say eco-friendly? What are you doing? What does that look like? Who is impacted? That lack of shared definition has also created a lot of problems when it comes to storytelling. Stepping away from the sustainability terminology, we like to use words like local. We like to use words like authentic. And again, we don't have any shared definition. And what can happen when we use words like this is there can be a disconnect between what we're trying to say and what our potential travelers understand and experience to be. So for example, something like authentic to some people might mean unique, a unique experience that I have. For some people, it might be a generational experience that has been for a long time. And when, again, we don't have a shared definition, we can create inappropriate expectations. It can result in disappointment when our travelers show up believing they're going to have an experience that has been specifically created for them, and then they realize that the travelers who are going in the afternoon are going to be doing the same thing. I thought you said this was authentic. Well, it's authentic, meaning this is, what happens when you visit this community, but it wasn't created for you. There was actually a recent case of a tour company that talked about an authentic city tour. Travelers love this stuff. They signed up. It was a foodie tour. And they went to the market where dogs were being sold for consumption. And there was a traveler on this trip who was very, very upset by that. She wanted an authentic experience, but she didn't want that experience. The use of the word authentic in that case, I mean, they took them to the market where this is what was happening. This is what the locals do. And she left a scathing review, ended up causing big brouhaha conversation about, how do we have these conversations with our travelers if we think we're offering an authentic experience, but they're expecting something else. So again, our terminology, our buzzwords that we use can cause a lot of challenges because we lack that shared definition. So what do we do instead? We become better storytellers. And it is important that we're measuring our carbon emissions and we know that we're actively cutting those. It's important that we know how much water we're saving and that internally we understand how much water we're saving. Those numbers matter because we need to measure in order to do a better job internally in our businesses. Those numbers don't mean a whole lot to most people. And we can share them. We should share them. We should be very honest, especially when we're working with members of the media. They should have access to that information, should be freely available. But when it comes to actually telling the story about sustainability, we can do this in a way that is more accessible, that is more approachable, that is more relevant, and far more interesting. I love the example about the plastics. We can talk about how many tons of plastics wash up on the beach, how much is carried away by the local community or recycled, or we can tell a really compelling story about how those plastics are being reused, maybe creating livelihoods, whatever the case might be. So one of the things that I think is really powerful here is to go back to my journalism roots, is thinking about what we call the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. Who is being impacted? Who are the change makers? What is happening? How is this impacting people? And really getting to the root of the people, getting to the root of how this is impacting a place, how this is impacting culture. I also would encourage you to think about your 5 senses. We like to show when we talk about, we like to tell people our stats. We like to tell people what we're doing. But again, let's show people what we're doing. Let's paint a compelling picture. And one of the ways we can do that is by using the 5 senses. Instead of telling us you're going to have or offer an authentic meal with a local family, I want you to tell me that you've plucked the fresh tomatoes from the garden and you're creating this fresh salad with a family of 4. I want you to tell me, what spices do you smell when your traveler is going to sit down? What does the beach feel like beneath somebody's feet when they're able to walk on it because it doesn't have glass in it, or glass or plastic on it because people have been picked that up? What color is the sunset? Don't just tell me you're going to have a beautiful sunset or a pristine, experience. What does that look like? Just really strong storytelling skills are going to go a long way. Know your numbers and then tell us the people. Tell us the why. Tell us the how. And let me just mention these two. I mentioned earlier that I'm a big advocate of solutions-focused stories. I believe one of the strongest opportunities that we have in tourism and on our storytelling is to acknowledge that tourism is a contributor to some of the global challenges we're facing. Biodiversity loss, carbon emissions creation, waste problems. And that is a very real story. About 85% of stories actually are focused on fear. And we have a huge opportunity to focus on the solutions. It's one of the things I love most about the work Gopi's doing is that we have amazing change makers doing work on the local level. And our storytelling in tourism is an opportunity to highlight those change makers, to highlight the local solutions that are happening that address global challenges that our travelers can relate to. Rising temperatures is not something that's happening in one place. Wildfires are happening all over the world. These things don't go away when our travelers go to a destination. So we need to be willing to go there when it comes to the hard issues that are happening in all the destinations that we work in. The question is, are you just going to sell a story of fear, or can you find a way to highlight and amplify amazing solutions that are happening on the ground? This is a great way to acknowledge our indigenous stewards of the land, to highlight often some marginalized communities who have been sidelined by tourism in the past, and to really bring forth some of the change makers that are doing great, great work. These are two stories that are focused on very real problems that are happening in the world. The Great Barrier Reef, as we know, is being bleached. It's a tragedy, and there are some really cool tourism initiatives that are engaging travelers in that story of climate change in a way that's very compelling. Gentrification in Caribbean nations is a huge problem. There are some very cool organizations that are working to make sure local people have access to beaches and spaces that have been preserved and kept only for travelers. So this is a great way to do this. Okay, it's not just what we write, it's not just what we say. There's more to a story than that. Our headlines, our photos, video, all of these are components of storytelling. And we need to be thinking how any one of those components might be communicating a story that is incomplete, that doesn't provide context, that maybe doesn't fully share what it is we're doing, or could be misinterpreted by our travelers. I'm seeing, for example, a lot of accommodations here who are sharing photos with me of pools. And they're very pretty, but I'm not hearing the story when I see those pools of where that water is coming from, and whether I'm having to ask, are you harvesting water? Are you using chemicals in those pools? The story I'm seeing with those photos is you can sit here and kick back and relax and not worry about water. And that's a very incomplete story about what the challenge of water is here. So we need to be thinking about what are travelers going to interpret when they see any part of the story that we're sharing with them. And that means looking at the entire story. Our text, our video, our captions. Yep. Yeah.
It's more about ethics of, in terms of, because you do very, very important stories, right? The ethics of clickbait. Because you say examine language, headlines, and photography. Yep. Sometimes, like for instance, an example is they use the Ambani wedding as a clickbait to talk about Gaza, yep, for instance. But yes, within your work, has that ever been used in the way to highlight certain important conversations?
I love this question, and it's a huge problem. People love clickbait. An example that actually just recently came across my radar that
really drove me crazy is voters ran a story that said, it was about adventure activities in Las Vegas, and it said, get beyond the slots for these outdoor spaces. I spent 10 years living in Las Vegas, and it's always get beyond the slots, step out of the casino. Dig a little deeper, and they've been removing slot machines from Las Vegas for 15 years. Less than 10% of people go to Las Vegas to gamble. That's not why people go there anymore. And yet the headline rode in on a stereotype, a cliche of what Las Vegas is, when the entire story was about all the outdoor activities there. But they rode in on this cliche about what the destination was. And so what that does is reinforce this picture of what you're going to find when you show up in Las Vegas. Same thing happens in Ibiza. Same thing happens in Goa is a great example too, right? There's so much more to these places, but destinations love to ride on the stereotypes that have been reinforced and that travelers have come to expect about a place. So when people show up, are we surprised that they think Ibiza is only a party destination and they can act like that? Are we surprised that people show up in Las Vegas and suddenly have this crazy mindset about how they're supposed to behave? We've done that by using clickbait, by riding in on the stereotypes and cliches that we've created in the tourism industry, in our marketing and our storytelling. The other thing I see is an increasing number of places that say we don't want Instagrammers are ruining our places. And then, sure enough, I get a press release that says top 10 Instagrammable places in X. Are we shocked then when Instagrammers show up and that's how they experience a destination? Because that's the story we're telling. We're saying we're a beautiful backdrop. Come take your photo, move on. So yeah, clickbait is, we do it because it's easy, it's comfortable, it's simple, it sells, but it's not right. And we can change that model. We have to change that model if we intend to tell a different story. Yeah.
There was an incident recently in Kerala. Some blogger featured a small village, which happens to be my dad's village, to be one of the most beautiful villages in India. Unfortunately, Anand Mahindra retweeted it. We had 10,000 broken beer bottles in a week. A harmless tweet destroyed the whole village. Now people, they see tourists coming, these are all domestic tourists coming motorbike from nearby village, like people there, like, you're welcome to come. They would stand at the border and they would say, you're welcome to come here, but please go and rest. It was terrible to see.
Same thing has happened in Meghalaya, Northeast India, because of social media. You have all the places when we used to visit in childhood, going to the living roots, and it's beautiful nature. Now there's a ticket counter, buses come right up to it, and there are like 300 people there. It's absolute chaos.
No, but I'm taking a cue from the clickbait. It's not just the words, but also tech. Like drones have kind of really taken it to next level. Like one of the examples, I was talking about indigenous tourism in the morning, and I did not talk about this, but when you show a perspective of a certain geographical location that is tourist friendly from a drone perspective, the actual place may be very different.
Yes.
And that drone visual perspective may not be the actual reality for all you know when you experience it on ground. And that's a whole different expectation versus delivery. And while we say that tech is kind of really helpful, I feel that drones just take it to a very contrary perspective when it comes to mindful tourism.
No, I just add to it. In fact, we talk about density, population when it comes to over tourism. Right, the photographs of no one being in the picture, despite it being a heavily tourist destination, actually becomes counterproductive, and all those things eventually add to.
Ultimately, it's not about the drone, it's about the person who's taking that drone shot and putting it up on his Instagram, right? So it's the influencers who are messaging in terms of clickbait to get all the attention, but portraying it in the wrong way.
Yeah, so, and I think this is another thing to talk about here when it comes to the photo. The photo is one thing, but you have
A caption. And we can't expect everybody to read the caption. But instead of just showing, and I encountered this too at the Amber Fort. There was, it was a madhouse, and there were, I think they were actually on an influencer trip. They crowded the space out. They were taking these lovely photos, and I'm sure what they were doing was just posting the photo of them in their very pretty outfits. And again, going back to like the swimming pools here, which we see like accommodations post a swimming pool with no context. I think, and I am increasingly seeing, not nearly enough, is the opportunity to use all means possible to provide context, historical context, environmental, cultural, even personal context, in the caption, in the way that we're sharing the photo. So we can share the photo of the beautiful swimming pool. We can share the photo of us taken at Amber Fort, but we need to provide more information about that. Talk about, hey, you can swim this beautiful infinity pool, but we would like you to know, water is a challenge here. And here's some information about water at our property. Here's what you can do to make sure that when you use our pool, you use it responsibly. And continuing the story. Don't stop at the photo. Don't stop at the headline. Don't stop at the clickbait. the drone thing is a huge problem because, from the macro distance, things look fabulous. But, zoom in and we've got waste management problems. We've got, where I live, we've got a really bad street cat problem. And those are severe community problems. But when people just post a photo of the beautiful sunset, people don't know that. So we do have a responsibility of going beyond that simple photo or whatever. Again, we can't always expect everybody to read the caption, but we need to be reinforcing it across all our materials, all the stories that we're sharing, the people who are talking about our destinations, who are selling our destinations, et cetera, et cetera.
Really small hoteliers and all of us trying to do our little best because we are completely passionately driven and trying to make a difference in our own little way. But the bigger picture around us is absolutely infuriating and frustrating on an everyday basis. So even in terms of storytelling, I think we're all trying our best way to just, be like, hey, we are here, we're trying to make a little difference. This is, use us as a little beacon and be like, okay, this is how you can actually do it. Use us as a medium of change in your own way. But the bigger picture around us is absolute madness and chaos.
It is madness. It is madness.
And I just had a conversation with somebody about this morning that said leisure travelers want and deserve just to go on holiday and relax. And that's what they want and they deserve it. And I hear that, I acknowledge that. And we know that leisure travel causes harm. We know that as an industry, we've been lax in being very clear about our expectations, saying no. And as a result, we have reinforced a narrative about not just destination or specific experience, but the travel narrative in general. What travel means, how to experience it, and how the traveler is not to be held responsible. And so this is why, yes, as a small hotelier, as a small business owner, you're working your one little corner of the world, you feel really small. I feel really small too. But again, we're all ripples in the pool here. So if we all say, we're going to tell a better story, we're going to reinforce the message that we, won't tolerate, wildlife endangerment. We won't tolerate waste creation. And we're doing that in our actions. We're going to do that in our on our website. We're going to do that when we work with influencers. We're going to do that when we have our tour guides go out with our travelers. We're going to hammer home that message, not only in our business, but through our actions as concerned global citizens, as influencers to our friends and family, across all mediums, because we care and that little tiny ripple can move that way. So, yes, exactly. I hear you. Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, we have multiple issues we're dealing with. We're talking about individuals. We're talking about needing regulation, which is where these things like these greenwashing laws are coming in. We're talking about the way editorial boards and magazines make money. I mean, I sit in meetings with editorial boards who are asking me, how can we tell a better story? And I'm like, you're still taking money from cruise companies, right? Yes, all of these things. I acknowledge this. So, what our hope here is to help you do what you can do. We have influence. It matters what we say. It matters to the few people we touch because we are seeing more bloggers. We are seeing more travel writers who care, who want to do a better job. So, just to keep us going here, how do we do that? Okay, and this kind of comes back to Gopi's question, like, how do we work with the influencers? How do we work with the media in a way that takes what we're doing and we're sharing that then in a meaningful way with the media, with the influencers, so that when they tell their story, their followers are hearing what we want them to hear. They're getting the message that we want to share. Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Or has been a niche, because I mean there are certain jargons that we were talking about that everyone cannot understand. How can the media help solve this problem and take this to the masses? Because I don't think sustainability is something that the masses understand even today. How do you do that?
Well, so I think what our opportunity here is turning the sustainability story into one that
isn't about sustainability in quotes. It's about doing, some of what Shivya was talking about here, where, I took this no-fly journey, and this is what I learned along the way. That story is not about, it's not how to cut carbon emissions. It's not about slow travel. It's about an experience. It's about the people she met along the way. It's about the life lessons that she had. And those are the travel stories that are compelling. And so when that's the story that people are reading, we're not jamming sustainability down their throats. What we're doing then, that is sustainability by default. You're participating in that because you're having that kind of experience. So, sustainability as a niche, it should not be what we're aiming for here. And we do see articles like 5 ways to have a sustainable trip, et cetera, but that's only speaking to the group of people who care, and that group might be very small. So, we have a responsibility to create businesses that are sustainable by design and default, so that when people participate in them, they are also acting with integrity and responsibility. And we can do that through our storytelling as well.
Example, I'll just give you a simple example. My family, very well educated, they understand sustainability from a bird's eye view. My sister and her family, they keep traveling everywhere, but they couldn't care less. How do you tell them this? I mean, that is what I'm asking.
Yeah, and I relate with that. My parents like to cruise.
Okay. And so what I do is I have conversations about, and I don't want to discourage them from cruising, because that's the way they're able to travel. It's an accessibility issue. What I do is we talk about, how do we choose, what are the things that they might be able to look for in a cruise line, so that, they are maybe not having as big of an environmental impact. We talk about, they say, well, should we do this tour or this tour? And I said, well, let's, look at what those tours mean. What is something that you can do when you go ashore, so that you're actually spending some money in the local community versus, just going back on the boat and having a meal. Again, they're still going to cruise. The story that we can tell is one of, how can you have a better experience as a traveler while you're on that cruise ship, in a way that not only allows you to be more sustainable, but have more fun, have a good time. So again, people are going to travel. People are going to choose to travel in a lot of different ways. The question is, how can we use our influence, use our storytelling in a way that makes sustainability compelling, just because it's a fun thing to do, a more interesting thing to do. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I want to make sure we keep going, because we're actually already over. Okay, so bridging the gap between our travel providers and our content media creators, etc. Again, we've done not a great job of integrating the media as our colleagues. They have been the media, they have been the content creators, they've been the influencers, they've not been the colleagues that we're just having conversations with about tourism trends, about issues related to tourism. I think one of the best things that we can do to help the media, to help content creators take more responsibility, is to tell them there are partners. We want to build relationships with you. You have a voice in what the future of this industry looks like, because without content creators and travel media being on this journey with us, we don't have a future of tourism. Their livelihood matters here too. So the first thing I would say is, let's create relationships. Let's invite media into these conversations, not because they're media and we want them to tell our story, but because they're our colleagues and they should be involved in these conversations with us, as we're just talking about the trends of what our future looks like. I want to talk a little bit about, though, how you can start sharing the story with, with media. And one of the things, we can't always have these one-on-one conversations. It's great when we can, but we want media who are interested in telling our story to be able to do that easily. Where are they going to go for that information? They're going to your website. What is missing on a lot of websites? An online media room, a space where they can go to get the information they need to talk about your property, to tell your story. This is your real estate. You have the opportunity right here to share the imagery, to use the words that you believe are appropriate, to highlight the people who are doing the good work in your space. And we're not seeing nearly enough of this. I would suggest that in your online media room that you are sharing your key sustainability messages. So your impact report should be accessible there. People should be able to see the numbers, but they should also, see the stories. They should hear and have easy access to the who, the where, the how, the storylines that show and demonstrate your sustainability commitments and work. Alternative storylines, your angles, your change makers, you can highlight all of this here. There's a destination in Arizona in the United States called Tucson, and every month they send to media a newsletter called Meet the Makers, and it highlights local business owners. And people are doing really cool things in the community. I love this newsletter because it's not hammering home like what is our sustainability work, but I'm always like intrigued by these people. And that's a compelling story. Those kinds of things should be there. The other thing I think is really important here is that in the communities that we work, in the destinations we work, there might be terminology that is needs context, that needs clarification, and this is your space to talk about what terms are appropriate to use and why. This is an online media guide that is part of the Indigenous Association of Canada's media room. A very cool guide that is available for media to think about, why and how to use certain terminology as it relates to Indigenous communities there. This kind of tool ensures that when your story is being told, it's being told with the right context, with the right words, and highlighting the right way to approach a story, a destination. Make sure also that you have contact information for somebody who's actually going to check and respond to the emails. We see a lot of if there's an email address, there's a lot of press@company.com that falls into some empty box that nobody ever checks. Be available to answer any questions that your media might have. We do have just a few media folks here, so I will just briefly talk about press trips and collaborations and some considerations that media should be thinking about. The truth is that media content creators, some are making good money, but a lot don't. It's not a lucrative career for the most part, which means that you do have a lot of media that are interested in and accepting press trips. They want to participate in collaborations with your destinations, and like Shivya said, if you can engage in a long-term relationship, that is so much more effective than one-off trips. However, as media, what are some of the things you should be considering as you're engaging in these things? I want you to be looking at your itineraries. Look at any things that might be red flags. Are you being asked to inappropriately interact with wildlife? Are you being asked to engage with local people in a way that really is not sitting right with you? Are you being asked to jump accommodations every single night without, without ever having time to get to know the people? You're using these resources, you're moving on. I want you to ask about the diversity of participants. So many press trips are often, we are bringing in these international influencers, and we have a very homogenous group of people. They're often young, they're white, they're able-bodied, and it's the same story that we're seeing from all of them. So as a content creator, I want you to be asking about the diversity of the people who are participating in these press trips, and actively make introductions to and encourage relationships with a wider diversity of content creators. I want you to be thinking about the transportation aspect of this. I was horrified. I recently saw it was actually called the Sustainability Press Trip in Switzerland that was requiring people to fly from Heathrow to Switzerland. It was a requirement of the press trip that they got on an airplane. And when a rail company stepped up and offered to be the transportation partner, they said, nope, we need you to fly from Heathrow. And nobody questioned that. All the comments here were people who were very excited about the sustainability aspect without even thinking about the way they were going to be arriving at the press trip. Ask those questions. And so on that point, you have a right to ask those questions. And you have a right to say, this concerns me. This does not align with my values as somebody who believes in responsible travel in more sustainable way of engaging in travel experience. Probably more relevant here, if you represent an accommodation, you're a service provider, you're here on behalf of a destination of some sort, I want you first and foremost, make sure that what you are presenting or that you are showing to your participants is something that is also being modeled by the people that your press trip participants are going to encounter. Quick story here. I was in Palestine many years ago. I had a really fantastic opportunity to meet a water scientist who was dealing with water issues in Palestine, which is a severe challenge there. And at the end of that conversation about the work he was doing, he handed out bottles of plastic bottles of water, even though they had developed this purification system for water. And I said, why are we getting plastic water bottles? And he said, well, that's what travelers expect. And he completely undercut his entire message. So I want you to really be thinking about how the message that you're planning on sharing with your press trip participants, your media, is being modeled by your company, by your frontline ambassadors, by your tour guides, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be modeling the behavior that we want our media colleagues to be writing about and sharing with their travelers. That's how you create trust. That's how you create rapport, and those things are really important. We need to stop using swag, or we need to be really thoughtful in swag. Travel writers do not need another tote bag. They do not need another water bottle. Most of them don't want stuff, and I know it's a very friendly gift, but we need to be thinking about how we can remove swag from our press trips. I loved what Shivya said before, that we shouldn't be shying away from the hard questions. In the past, it has been like, here's your itinerary, this is the story we want you to share. We need to break that. We need to be encouraging our media partners to ask hard questions. We need to be willing to have those hard conversations. We need to be willing to go there when it comes to the climate, when it comes to biodiversity, when it comes to all kinds of realities in the destinations that we represent. So it's okay to go there. Your journalists, your creators, give them the benefit of the doubt here. Choose smartly who you're working with and encourage them to explore those storylines on their own. Help them find the change makers, the people who can help tell that story. And then the last thing I would just suggest is that we do a better job of partnering with our surrounding areas, and we're more thoughtful about our transportation partners. I know that it's tempting to think, it's us versus them. We don't want them to cover our competitors, whatever the case might be. But if we are encouraging slow, sustainable travel, then we want our media partners to be thinking about how they can spend more time in an area, how they can spread that financial benefit across a region versus just a single accommodation before moving several hundred kilometers away. And also be partnering with those slow transportation options. And I just want to leave you with this thought: is that ultimately, we're talking about the media here because they do have great influence, but we are all influencers. Your small social media following, your parents, your friends, your kids, your colleagues, your community members are looking to you. We learn from each other. And so the stories that we're sharing are super powerful. And so we need to be modeling that behavior. We need to be talking about these things with the people that we love, with the people that we know. We need to normalize this as a way of traveling and of approaching a future that is facing a lot of challenges. So, all right, we've already gone over for today. Thank you so much. Shivya and I would be happy to answer any questions. And I just wanted to leave this here for anybody who might be curious or want to work with us more. We each actually offer our own course. I offer one on responsible travel writing for travel media. Shivya offers one for content creators. And so we do have a couple discounts for the next few days. But beyond that, we would be happy to answer any additional questions, have more conversations with you, because it's an area that we feel very passionate about, because we have a great opportunity to share our story. Let's do it. Let's do it in a way that means something. Yeah. So we've gone over. Should we step off then?
There's a question there.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is the best ways to find people like you and more, and the easiest way to do it?
Yeah. So I think one of the mistakes that especially smaller enterprises often make is hand this over to a PR agency or to someone even within your own marketing team who might not have the right directive. So I think the best way to identify
In today's very cluttered world of social media creators and bloggers is to actually follow them for a while, follow someone for a month, and see, is that the person you want representing your brand, is that the person you want telling your story. And of course, numbers are important. You can see, it's very easy to see their followers and how many likes and stuff they get, but I think the most important metric is how people engage with them. Because you might find someone who has 1 million followers who gets like, I don't know, like 30,000 likes per post, but the comments that people post on their thing is wow or great, nice picture, nice video. Are they really engaging people through the story that they are telling? Whereas you'll find people who might have a smaller number of followers, a smaller reach, but people are actually really engaging with them through thoughtful comments. And so if you follow someone for that 1 month period of time, I think that's a great way to realize whether this is the person you want to work with. And it's also that time frame for you to build a relationship with them. It could start with simply commenting on what they're sharing in an honest and genuine way, taking that conversation on DM, on email, over the phone, and actually forging that relationship.
And I would also add to that is look at the way people are sharing those stories. Is that the kind of story that you want your influencer to be telling? Because again, they might have 1 million followers, they might even have great engagement. But if they're not sharing the story that you feel would accurately and appropriately represent your destination or your product or service, then that's not somebody you want to engage in. And there are a lot of incredible influencers, content creators out there who have large followings, including what you might consider mainstream travelers. It's not just a niche. And they're telling really compelling story. People aren't necessarily following because of their sustainability angle, but because they're interesting people, because they're doing interesting things and they're telling interesting stories. So those are the people you want. Yeah.
And I think it's also important to make sure that if you have a PR or a marketing team, they're really well versed with what your sustainability commitments are, because these are the people who become your ambassadors when you engage with, bloggers and media and creators. And I won't take any names here, but there are a couple of hotels here whose PR teams have reached out to me. And, when I start asking thorny questions and they don't have the answers, I even go to the extent of asking, are they then greenwashing? And sometimes PR people will tell me yes, but this is what they've told us to do. And, you know, so you have to be really sure that the people who are conveying your sustainability messages know what you're.
That or the other thing. And when the person on the other end says, I don't know, or we can't share that, that's a big red flag. That's not a partner that you want to have if your ethos is to share a genuine story about sustainability. Yeah.
It doesn't relate to anything that you went to report and had to stop or not report.
It's actually why I got out of
travel writing and why I do what I do now. I didn't know when I started way back, almost 20 years now. Um, I, I, I'm on my own journey too. I swam with dolphins. I went on cultural tourism experiences that I realized now were super exploitative. I regret those things, but I learned from them. At the time, I didn't know what to do. I could see I was in an ethical gray space, but I didn't know the questions to ask. I ended up actually writing not negative stories about those experiences, but taking those experiences and writing about kind of the ethical quandaries. I remember writing an article that said, oh my gosh, way back in 2009, that said, is cultural tourism exploitative? Because I went on an experience where I was horrified. And so I didn't write about that experience, but I took that experience and wrote about the ethical quandaries of this kind of travel. So I have had experiences like that, and that's where I learned to ask these kinds of questions.
Yeah, I think likewise for me, it's definitely been a journey. It's happened when I've been invited by a tourism board, for example, and I've realized that a certain experience that they offer was, it didn't sound right on paper, and it definitely didn't seem right when I was there. And I try to raise these questions mostly privately, but I also try to write, something more general that addresses this question. And I think specifically in India, it's happened with, for example, where I've been invited to an accommodation that has told me a great sustainability story. But when I've got there, I've tried to do my research, spoken to. So this happened in Kashmir actually. I just stepped out of the boundary of the accommodation and I began to speak to some of the people who live in the village there. And the thing that I heard from everybody is that they are discharging their sewage into our underground water, and we know that our underground water sources are contaminated. We're not able to use this land anymore for farming. Our cattle won't graze here. We know that the land is contaminated, and we know that this hotel is responsible. So then I went back and I spoke to the manager, and the manager completely changed the topic and went on his own trip. And then I decided that I'm not getting satisfactory answers, and I, in good faith, cannot write about this place. And then later the PR agency contacted me asking, why haven't you written what you promised to write? So I said, these are the questions that I raised and I haven't received any satisfactory answers. If you have answers for me, I'm happy to, engage in this discussion and write about it. And if you want me to write the real story, I will write it. So you tell me. And then I never heard back again from the PR agency.
All right. Well, thank you so much. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to find us. We're around for the rest of the day.
Thank you.